The bank manager didn't sit down when I walked in. He closed the door first. The soft click of the lock felt louder than it should have. His hand tightened around a manila folder, knuckles whitening, as if the paper inside might try to escape. He inhaled, then stopped halfway, like his lungs had forgotten the rest of the job. "Before you say anything," he said, voice lower than before, "you need to understand this could affect your degree." He paused, eyes flicking to the file, then back to me, "your credit, and your future employment." The word degree landed wrong, like it had already been moved somewhere without asking me. I didn't speak. I just nodded once, slow, because everything in his posture told me this conversation had started long before I walked into that room. The folder slid across the desk. My name was on the tab. Not typed, handwritten. I noticed that before anything else, because people only write names by hand when they expect to remember them later. 2 hours earlier, I'd been standing in line in my graduation gown, the cheap fabric sticking to my wrists in the heat. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it. Everyone ignores their phone right before their name gets called. The auditorium smelled like hairspray and coffee and nerves. When they announced my name, I stood, smiled automatically, and stepped forward. That was when my father's voice cut through the polite applause. "She shouldn't even be here." It wasn't loud. That was the worst part. It was calm enough that security heard it before the crowd did. My sister didn't look at me. She stared straight ahead, jaw set, like this was a correction, not a scene. Someone behind me whispered. Phones came up. A hand brushed my elbow and then didn't, like they'd thought better of touching me. I froze, diploma halfway into my hand, because for one stupid second my brain tried to argue with reality. This isn't how proud parents behave. This isn't what this moment is supposed to look like. They were too calm. Calm people think they're right. Security asked me to step aside, not them, me. I remember noticing how clean the floor looked up close, how the sealant reflected the stage lights like water. My father said I was being dramatic. My sister said I always thought I deserved more. Not more love, more access, more than I'd earned. It didn't sound personal. It sounded rehearsed, like a family policy. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I handed back the diploma I hadn't even fully touched yet. That was when my phone buzzed again. I didn't check it. I walked out into sunlight that felt too bright, like the set of a movie after the actors had wrapped and no one bothered turning the lights down. The bank appointment was already on my calendar. I'd scheduled it weeks earlier to ask about a student account transfer after graduation. Ordinary, boring stuff, the kind of thing adults do when they think their life is moving forward on schedule. The teller didn't smile when she saw my name. She made a call instead. That's how I ended up in that office with the locked door and the handwritten tab. The manager flipped the folder open, then closed it again, like he needed a second to decide how honest he was allowed to be. He asked me if I recognized the signatures. I said yes, some of them, not all. He didn't react, he just nodded and turned another page. I noticed dates, repeating amounts, the same branch code. My name was on more of these documents than it should have been. That thought came clean and quiet, like a fact, not a fear. Then another followed it, just as calm. If my name is here, liability could be too. I left the bank with copies I hadn't asked for and a receipt timestamped 11:42 a.m. I noticed that because details stick when your brain is trying to stay ahead of something it doesn't fully see yet. On the bus ride home, I finally checked my phone. 3 missed calls, 1 text from my father. He didn't ask if I was okay. He wrote, "We need to talk before you make this worse." That word, before, sat heavy, like something had already started moving and he was trying to get in front of it. My sister sent nothing. She never does when she thinks silence is safer. At home, I laid the documents out on the kitchen table the way I'd been taught to study for exams. Not emotionally, systematically. I grouped them by date, then by account, then by signature. Patterns don't announce themselves, you have to invite them. The more I sorted, the clearer it became that this wasn't sloppy, it was careful. Careful enough to look accidental if you didn't know where to look. I thought about the way my family had stood at graduation, united and calm, like they were enforcing a rule, not punishing a person. I thought about the fees, who paid them, who signed what. The story I'd been told my whole life didn't match the way adults with nothing to hide behaved. My phone rang again. Unknown number, voicemail. A woman's voice, professional, measured. She said she was calling to confirm an appointment request connected to my name and a financial review. She gave a date, 2 days out. I didn't call back right away. I looked at the documents one more time and slid them into a folder of my own. This time, I wrote my name on the tab myself.
4 years earlier, when the acceptance email arrived, my hands shook. Not from excitement, but from disbelief. I had applied quietly, late at night, filling out forms after everyone else had gone to sleep. I didn't tell my family until the confirmation was already sitting in my inbox. When I finally mentioned it at dinner, my father didn't smile. He leaned back in his chair, glanced at my mother, and said, "We'll handle it." The words sounded generous, but something about the way he said it, flat, final, made my stomach tighten. I was 18 and didn't yet know how often control wears the costume of care. They moved fast after that, faster than I expected. My father insisted we didn't need to talk to the financial aid office. Too many questions, he said. It complicates things. When a thick envelope arrived from the school with tuition breakdowns and loan options, he took it from the mailbox before I could touch it. Later that night, he placed a single page in front of me at the kitchen table and slid a pin across the surface. "Just sign," he said. "Routine education paperwork." I asked what it was. He smiled like I was being childish. "You trust us, right?" Over the next 4 years, that question became a pattern. Every semester, a signature. Always late at night. Always just one page visible. The rest clipped behind it, hidden. My mother stood nearby, quiet, hands folded into each other, eyes lowered. When I asked for copies, she told me not to stress myself out. "Focus on school," she said. "That's your job." They discouraged me from taking a part-time job, said it would distract me, said it would look bad, said they didn't want me exhausted. I believed them because believing them was easier than pushing back. The payments never made sense. I noticed it even then. Each semester, I'd receive a confirmation email from the university, tuition paid in full, but the sender details were different every time. One semester, it came from a private lender I didn't recognize. Another time, it referenced a trust account. Once, the email listed a payment split across 2 sources within minutes of each other. When I asked my father, he brushed it off. "Accounting stuff," he said. "Don't overthink it." My younger sibling, Ryan, never had to ask. He was the golden one. His tuition conversations were open, loud, celebrated. My parents talked about his future like it was a group project. With me, everything happens behind closed doors. I told myself it was because I was independent, capable, low maintenance. That's how manipulation works. It convinces you that silence is a compliment. I leaned on my friend Maya instead. She noticed things I pretended not to. "Why don't you have your own login for the student account?" she asked once, squinting at my phone. "Why does your dad get the emails?" I shrugged. He's organized. The lie tasted thin even as I said it. Maya didn't push. She never did. She just watched. By junior year, the pressure increased. My father started reminding me, casually, how expensive everything was, how lucky I was, how some kids didn't get these chances. It was never framed as debt, but it felt like one, a moral one, something I owed them even if I couldn't name it. When I talked about studying abroad for a semester, the conversation ended abruptly. "Absolutely not," he said. "That's unnecessary." Every confirmation email still came from the same bank branch. I didn't realize that mattered until much later. At the time, it was just a detail, one of many I filed away without knowing why. The night before graduation, my father asked if I'd spoken to the university registrar recently. I said no. He nodded, satisfied. "Good," he said. "No need to stir things up now." The comment lingered, sharp and unexplained. Sitting in the bank office years later, blinds half closed, that memory snapped into place. The pressure to sign, the refusal to show receipts, the insistence on silence. My mouth went dry as I thought about the words the bank official had used: third-party funding, irregularities, freeze. Back then, I hadn't understood that the money wasn't the gift. The control was. And control, once threatened, doesn't let go quietly. The elevator doors closed behind me with a soft, metallic thud, and for a second I just stood there, staring at my reflection in the brushed steel. My graduation gown was already folded into my bag, the tassel tucked inside like something fragile. I didn't feel angry. I felt alert. That was new. The humiliation from the ceremony was still sitting somewhere deep in my chest, but it wasn't burning anymore. It was cold now, sharp, like my brain had flipped a switch and decided it was time to pay attention instead of feeling sorry for myself. I didn't go home. I didn't call my parents. I didn't text my brother. I walked straight back to the bank branch, the same one whose name I'd seen semester after semester at the bottom of those payment confirmations I'd ignored for years. The lobby smelled like carpet cleaner and stale coffee, and everything about it felt aggressively normal, which somehow made my pulse louder in my ears. I asked to speak to someone about my student loan file, not loudly, not emotionally, just calmly, like someone who expected to be taken seriously. They put me in a smaller office this time, glass walls instead of wood, blinds half open. A woman in her 40s introduced herself as Karen Miller from compliance, her voice polite but guarded. She pulled up my file on the screen, and I watched her posture change in real time, shoulders stiffening, jaw setting. She didn't look at me right away. She scrolled, she clicked, she frowned. The silence stretched long enough that it felt intentional. Finally, she said my full name, slow and careful, like she was testing how it sounded in the room, and asked if I'd ever been informed about a trust account established when I was 17. I told her no, not once. She nodded, as if that answer confirmed something she already suspected, and turned the monitor slightly so I could see. Rows of transactions filled the screen, amounts that made my stomach tighten. $48,000 here, $32,000 there. Tuition disbursements, housing fees, lab charges, all paid on time, every time. None of it came from my parents' checking account. None of it came from their income. Karen explained, still calm, that the funds originated from a trust registered under my name but administered by a family-appointed trustee, my father. The word trustee hit me harder than any insult he'd thrown at me on that stage. She kept talking, explaining that the trust itself was funded by an insurance settlement tied to an incident from my childhood, something medical, something serious enough to warrant a six-figure payout. $187,000 to be exact. My money. Money I'd never seen, never touched, never even known existed. It had been sitting there for years, quietly paying for my education while I was told to be grateful, to behave, to remember who was sacrificing for me. I felt stupid for about half a second. Then that feeling passed, replaced by something steadier. I asked questions, lots of them. How was the trust structured? Who had signing authority? What documents had my name on them? Karen's answers were precise, professional, and increasingly uncomfortable. She explained that there were waivers on file, signed in my name, limiting my access to information until a certain age, 25. I was 22. I asked to see them. She hesitated, then said she'd need approval, but her eyes gave her away. She was disturbed. She left the room and came back with a folder thick enough to make my throat dry. Inside were copies of signatures that looked like mine, but not quite. The slant was off, the pressure wrong. I'd signed things back then, sure, but never after reading them fully. I remembered my father standing over me at the dining table, saying it was all routine, saying we didn't need lawyers, didn't need to complicate things. Seeing those pages now with words like waiver, consent, limitation of liability printed in neat legal fonts made something click into place. This hadn't been care, it had been strategy. Karen closed the folder slowly and said the line that rewired everything in my head. Someone used your identity to control money that legally wasn't theirs. She didn't say my father's name. She didn't have to. As I left the bank, my phone buzzed with a message from my mother, asking if I'd calmed down yet, if I was ready to apologize for causing a scene. I stared at the screen and felt almost amused. They really thought the worst was over. Over the next few days, I moved quietly. I requested full transaction histories. I scheduled a consultation with a lawyer recommended by the bank, a man named David Brooks, who specialized in trust disputes and didn't flinch when I laid everything out. He didn't promise revenge, he promised clarity. He explained how trusts could be abused, how control often hid behind the language of protection. He pointed out inconsistencies I hadn't even noticed, dates where funds were shifted just before I'd asked questions, clauses activated right after I'd mentioned wanting a part-time job. Each detail felt like another thread pulled loose. Meanwhile, my family carried on like nothing had changed. My brother posted photos from the graduation, cropped so I wasn't in them, talking about family pride and hard work. My father called relatives, spinning his version, saying I'd been disrespectful, unstable, influenced by outsiders. Watching it all from a distance was surreal, like seeing a play after you'd read the script. The final piece fell into place one evening when David called and told me he'd found the original settlement records. The trust wasn't supposed to be discretionary. It was supposed to be mine to control once I turned 18. Someone had amended it, quietly, legally questionable, ethically disgusting. As I hung up the phone, I thought back to the moment on that stage, the way my father's voice hadn't shaken when he told security I didn't belong there. It hadn't been anger, it was fear. They'd humiliated me because they thought I was about to find out, because control only works when the person being controlled stays confused. Sitting alone in my apartment, paperwork spread out on the floor, I didn't feel victorious, I felt focused. The noise was gone, the pieces fit, and for the first time since that bank office door had locked behind me, I understood that everything they'd done at my graduation wasn't the end of my story. It was a cover, and it was already failing.
By the time I left David's office, the sky had already shifted to that dull gray that makes everything feel slower than it actually is. I didn't call anyone, I didn't text back, I didn't post anything. I just started collecting. Not emotionally, procedurally. Every email I'd ever ignored because it felt boring, every PDF I downloaded and never opened, tuition confirmations, trust summaries, scanned signatures that didn't quite look like mine once you zoomed in. David had been clear, not dramatic, just precise. He said we wouldn't accuse anyone yet. We would let the paper speak first. Over the next week, my days followed the same quiet rhythm. Mornings at my kitchen table with a legal pad and coffee going cold. Afternoons forwarding files to a secure portal. Nights listening to voicemails I'd once brushed off as family noise. The patterns showed up fast once I stopped pretending they wouldn't. Payments routed through the same regional branch, trust amendments dated within days of my tuition deadlines, waivers signed when I was 19, 20, barely old enough to understand what liability even meant. Every document carried my name like a stamp, but none of them carried my consent. Somewhere in the middle of it all, David sent the first formal notice, not to my parents directly, but to the trust administrator listed on record. It was polite, clinical, almost boring to read. Request for clarification, request for authority verification, request for suspension of discretionary control pending audit. That last word mattered, audit. When it landed, things started moving without me lifting a finger. The bank froze outgoing trust distributions within 48 hours. A compliance review was triggered automatically. I got a call from a different number, a man introducing himself as an external auditor assigned to review irregularities connected to my Social Security number. He didn't ask how I felt. He asked for documents. I sent them. While all of that happened, my family kept living like nothing had changed. I saw it through the cracks they didn't realize were still open. My sister posting a brunch photo, champagne flutes raised, my father emailing a family friend about next quarter planning, my mother forwarding me a church event flyer like we were still on speaking terms. No one asked me about the bank. No one mentioned graduation. They thought silence meant control still worked. The mediation notice went out the following Monday. Neutral office downtown, glass walls, conference table big enough to keep emotions at a distance. I arrived early with David. We didn't rehearse lines. We didn't need to. When my parents walked in, my father smiled like this was a misunderstanding he'd already solved in his head. My mother avoided my eyes. My sister didn't come at all. That told me more than anything she could have said. The mediator opened the folder and started reading. Trust formation date, funding source, settlement origin. My father's posture changed halfway through, shoulders tightening, jaw locking. When the mediator asked him to explain his authority to redirect trust funds earmarked solely for my benefit, he started talking fast, too fast, about family sacrifice, about intent, about how everything had been for my good. The auditor cut in gently and said intent wasn't the question, control was. The room went quiet when they explained that the trust had been funded by an insurance settlement from an accident I barely remembered. Money legally protected until I reached full financial maturity. Money that should never have been used as leverage. My father looked at me then,
really looked like he was seeing a stranger who'd learned a new language. He opened his mouth, probably to explain, maybe to blame. David raised a hand, calm as ever, and said any further communication would go through counsel. That was the moment the power shifted. Not loudly, not publicly, just irreversibly. Over the next 2 weeks, the fallout stayed mostly invisible to the outside world. Accounts remained frozen, access revoked. A civil inquiry opened into fiduciary misuse. One family friend who'd always defended my parents suddenly stopped returning calls. Another relative asked to be removed from any correspondence. People disappear fast when paperwork starts asking questions. I didn't celebrate, I organized. I signed updated directives, I authorized new oversight. I sat through one more meeting where authority figures spoke about liability and restitution like it was weather, neutral and unavoidable. My family didn't shout, they didn't cry, they recalculated. And for the first time, their math didn't include me as a variable they could control. By the end of the month, my father's reputation had taken a quiet hit he couldn't talk his way out of. No charges announced yet, no headlines, just closed doors where open ones used to be. Invitations that stopped coming, money that stopped moving. One evening, alone in my apartment, I lined up the final stamped documents on the floor and realized something strange. I wasn't angry anymore. The humiliation at graduation felt distant now, almost small, like a move made out of panic instead of power. They hadn't thrown me out because I was weak. They'd done it because they were about to lose something they'd never truly owned. And now, they had.
I still remember the moment I stepped into my apartment, the door clicking softly behind me, shutting out the world that had tried to define me for so long. My hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from the release of a pressure I had carried without knowing its full weight. The stack of documents, neatly organized on my dining table, told a story the graduation stage had tried to hide. Trust agreements, payment trails, legal waivers, all lined up like soldiers, each one silent but shouting the truth. Sipping my lukewarm coffee, I traced the signatures. They were mine, yes, but they were coerced, manipulated under the guise of parental guidance. And yet, paradoxically, I had unknowingly financed my own education through a hidden settlement, a carefully guarded sum that had been my right all along. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, they had wielded control, subtly, under the guise of protection. Now the control had quietly shifted. The emails I had saved, some back-and-forth exchanges with the compliance officer, played out in my mind. Each message was a testament to patience and silent strategy. The calmness in the officer's tone had been disarming, an ally who understood the weight of understatement. Someone used your identity to control money that legally wasn't theirs, he had said, and that line still echoed, soft yet devastating. I didn't need to shout or confront anyone in anger. I just needed the documents, the evidence, and the quiet confidence to let them speak for themselves. I arranged the paperwork methodically, cross-referencing account numbers, checking transaction timestamps, and noting the subtle patterns of the trust disbursements. My apartment smelled faintly of old books and coffee, a small cocoon of normalcy that contrasted with the storms I had weathered. Outside, the city continued, indifferent and loud, but in here, clarity reigned. I realized that the graduation humiliation, the whispers, the cold stares from family, it had all been based on the assumption that I would never dig deeper. They had underestimated calm intelligence. On my phone, a message from my friend Sophia popped up. "Coffee later? We need to celebrate." Quietly. I smiled. She had been my mirror throughout, reflecting my doubts, grounding my emotions, reminding me that composure didn't mean weakness. I typed back simply, "Absolutely. 3 p.m., Café Luma." There was no need for grand gestures, only acknowledgement that life had moved forward. I glanced at my degree, now framed on the wall above my desk. The gold lettering shimmered under the afternoon sunlight. It was mine, my achievement, and for the first time I could see it without the cloud of manipulation looming overhead. The humiliation, once so monumental, now seemed desperate and petty in comparison to the quiet triumph of reclaiming control.
A knock at the door startled me. It was the lawyer, David, returning a few copies of formal notices he had sent to the bank and the trust administrators. He gave a brief nod. Everything is frozen. Their control, their access, it's gone. No fanfare, no dramatic reveal, just facts. I nodded, letting the weight of those words settle. The family, the golden childs, the enablers, they were all exposed in the cold light of legality, accountability finally catching up. I sat back, fingers intertwined, reflecting on the chain of events that had led here. For every subtle manipulation they had deployed over the years, I had countered with quiet observation and precise action. For every whispered threat at graduation, I had countered with methodical patience. The calmness that had once been mistaken for passivity had become my greatest weapon. Even now, as I scanned the city skyline from my modest apartment window, I felt a sense of serene ownership over my life. No yelling, no dramatic confrontations, no viral courtroom meltdown, just peace, dignity, and freedom. I didn't win flashy wealth. I didn't orchestrate a public spectacle. I simply reclaimed what had always been mine and ensured that those who had tried to control it would never hold sway again. The phone buzzed again, another message from Sophia, this one lighter, almost teasing. Guess your family owes you a coffee now, huh? I laughed softly, a sound that had been buried under tension for far too long. Only one, I texted back, and make it quiet. As I leaned back in my chair, a final thought crossed my mind, a quiet mantra that would stay with me forever. I didn't win anything flashy, I just got my life back. The graduation stage, the whispered accusations, the cold stares from family, it had all been based on the assumption that I would never dig deeper. They had underestimated calm intelligence. If anyone watching this has ever felt controlled by people claiming they were helping, know that calm intelligence, patience, and meticulous strategy can dismantle even the most intricate web of manipulation. There's power in stillness, strength in observation, and freedom in reclaiming what's rightfully yours. And in that quiet, sunlit apartment, I allowed myself to breathe fully for the first time in years. I wasn't rich, I wasn't famous, but I was free.